Katsitsionni Fox, who will, the two people will be coming in on Zoom simultaneously, correct? Yeah. Allan, you have to get up the.
All right, thanks. Thank you all for coming tonight. And I'm J.H. Takagi of Third World Newsreel, an alternative media center that works in educational distribution, exhibition, production, exhibition, and training. We do a lot of training stuff and events like this. It started in 1967 as the Newsreel. It was a radical film collective that made some of the iconic documentaries that you may have seen about Black Panthers, the Young Lords, early stage, second wave of the women's movement, Asian American movement, things like that. Became Third World Newsreel in the 70s, and focusing on media buying about people of color and social justice issues. We put this event together as part of a series of programs that we've been doing that tries to connect the past and present through media and through activism then and now. And this is the fourth one we've done this year. We did two earlier ones in the summer on Latinx community issues. And, sorry. and this is the second of our Mohawk Nation events. And I'm very thrilled to have the filmmakers and activists here tonight. I'm gonna give you a short intro of our panel participants because there is a longer one in the handout that I hope you picked up. Our first, we have Clifton Matias, the Red Hook Council, Allan Siegel, filmmaker, Katsitsionni, filmmaker, and Annie Rochon, professor at Paul Smith College. We're going to start with Katsitsionni, who made the first film you saw. Katsitsionni Fox is the filmmaker of the Mohawk territory of Akwesasne, and among her films are Without a Whisper, which you just saw, and O'Harakan Under the Husk, which follows two Mohawk girls through their traditional passage rites to becoming Mohawk women. She's won numerous awards for her work. She's going to talk about the making of her film and the challenges in making it. Welcome, Katsitsionni.
Hello, everybody. My name is Katsitsionni, which means I make flowers. I'm from Akwesasne, MOHAWK Nation territory, and happy to be here tonight with everybody.
So tell us how you got started on your film and why, what made you, compelled you to make this film?
I started to think about making this film when I had just completed my last film, which was Under the Husk. I had heard Sally Roche Wagner speak at an education conference probably like 10 years before I started making this film. And that was the first time that I had heard this story about Haudenosaunee women influenced in the women's rights movement. And I thought that we should all know this as Haudenosaunee people, and the world should know this. So that's why I made the film, trying to change the narrative about that history.
And was it hard to make? Was it hard to get even funding to make it?
I received funding through Vision Maker Media. They fund Indigenous films. They're like a branch of the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. So Without a Whisper will be on PBS for the next, it's on there for 4 years. So it started in 2020, so it'll be on there until 2024. I also ran the film festival circuit. And I had like different screenings I did. Most of them were on Zoom because it was during the pandemic. So that was one advantage, I guess. Like I actually was able to attend pretty much all the screenings because they were on Zoom.
And was it difficult to make in terms of getting people to cooperate and talk?
No. I when I decided to make the film, I knew the two women that I wanted to have in the film, and they were already good friends. So Sally and Louise already had known each other for years, and I thought it was kind of reflective of what the topic was, like Indigenous women and non-Indigenous women connecting and sharing with each other. So they were already doing that today. So they were kind of reflective of that past history too. And they were great to follow around. I never knew what they were gonna do. I never knew what they were gonna say. And so it was very interesting documenting them throughout the years.
Great. Thank you. And we're going to come back to questions from the audience after we get Professor Annie Rochon to talk about media representation of Indigenous people. You're muted right now, Annie, so you need to unmute.
Hi. Is it good?
Yeah, in fact, let me it gives me a moment to read your intro. Annie Rochon is an assistant professor of classical and modern languages and chair of the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Council at Paul Smith College. We had the first of our Mohawk Nation events up at Paul Smith College in October, which he organized, and that's in near the Ganienkeh area. And so Annie Rochon will talk about media representation of Indigenous peoples.
Thank you very much. So Paul Smith College is located in the Adirondacks, about an hour from Akwesasne, and about 2 hours from the Canadian border. I myself, I am Native American. I am from Kanehsatake, which is a reservation, a Mohawk reservation in Quebec, Canada. So, film and television and the media in general have the ability to shape the minds of people and introduce people to new ideas in the world. However, our take on Indigenous people in film, television, Hollywood especially, have been representative of society's view and treatment of Indigenous people. We can talk about cultural appropriation, right? So cultural appropriation is when elements of a culture are adopted by people of another culture and can be problematic in many, many ways, especially when the dominant culture is appropriating a culture that is seen as a minority. So with regard to Indigenous people, the dominant white settler society has been in control of the narrative being told about Indigenous people. We can think quickly about Pocahontas, right? When we think about Indigenous people in past media, the first thing that comes to mind is the Disney movie of Pocahontas, which is not an example of what the Native people are. There's also a lot of historical inaccuracy and a lot of romance too in those movies. We are very lucky today to have filmmakers such as Mrs. Fox, who is changing the dynamic of the media and film and television in today's society by being more representative of what Native people are, by taking ownership of the narrative again. We think about women such as Pocahontas, and we think about man as medicine man or those warrior. And this is a big form of stereotype, right? It's very difficult to move away from that stereotype as an Indigenous person. People are really have a mindset of what an Indigenous person should be. It's today with with Netflix, and we looked at Hollywood film where Indigenous people are typically portrayed as living in the wilderness and on reservation. In reality, there's a lot of number of tribal members that live off reservations, such as me, including major cities, right? So in Hollywood, it's really rare to see Native people portrayed living anywhere else that's not desolate, rural, or in the wilderness. So we are trying to change the dynamic, and again, this is because of filmmakers such as Mrs. Fox and Allan and other people that we can turn this around and change the media and the perspective on how Indigenous people are represented in the media today.
Thank you. And that is a good segue to Allan Siegel, who is the maker of MOHAWK Nation, and he was also a co-founder of the original newsreel back in 1967. So maybe you could tell us about how, at that point, it had just become Third World Newsreel, I think, how this film came to be.
Good evening, everybody, and I'm glad everyone is able to turn out to come to this screening and to see some of these important films. The way that this film that I worked on, MOHAWK Nation, the way that this film got made was because of a underground newspaper called Akwesasne Notes. I don't know if any of you have ever heard of it before. Okay, Clifton has. Okay, you have heard of it also. Yes, very good. Akwesasne Notes was like one of the few newspapers at that time which actually wrote about and publicized activities that were taking place in relationship to Mohawk peoples, excuse me, in upstate New York. And it's through Akwesasne Notes that this film came about, okay? And this film at the time is to create some knowledge about what was taking place. That was the motivation of the film, to create information, to share the experience of people who are taking over the land in upstate New York, and to just spread the reasons that they were doing what they were doing, okay? And I hope, I mean, 2 or 3 years ago, this film was sort of reborn in a way, shown at the Film Forum. And a program about decolonizing cinema. And this film hopefully is part of that process of decolonization, because it like gives voice to the people who took over this land and their motivation for taking over this land. So with that, I will move it on to Clifton.
So Clifton Matias of the Red Hawk Native American Arts Council in New York City is going to try to put the films we saw in a context of what is going on now in the range of indigenous activities throughout the U.S. and elsewhere, where he's been active on a lot of different fronts.
Thank you. My name is Clifton Matias. I'm the cultural director of the Red Hawk Native American Arts Council.
Closer.
Is it on? Okay. Indigenous Arts Council, Native American Arts Council. For 30 years, I've been here in New York City. I'm also the international president and founder of Red Rum Motorcycle Club, which is the largest indigenous motorcycle club in the world. We use the club in lots of good ways to support different actions and different things that are happening in indigenous country today. I started my indigenous work way back, I guess officially in 1992 at the United Nations, in front of the United Nations, when we all gathered to protest the 500th anniversary of Columbus Day. And that kind of just launched me into this journey of work. And I've been on the front lines of Standing Rock. You know, I had my Standing Rock tattoo. I've been on the front lines of Mauna Kea. I was at Standing Rock twice, actually, and Mauna Kea twice, alongside Auntie Pua. I've been to Bears Ears. I went up to Line 3 and stood with Winona LaDuke and on Line 3, and then also, well, she actually wasn't there that day, but she arranged. I mean, we were talking on the way, but she got called up to an emergency, so I should say I was with her there. But nonetheless, we were, myself, Chief Perry from the Ramapo, we went to Line 3, and last summer. The Ramapo had a camp in 2016 alongside Standing Rock, to stand in support of Standing Rock, which was raided by the police numerous times, and actually people were incarcerated there. And then also I've been to Oak Flats, I'm sure I forgot of a few other places that I've been. But you know, the work of being an activist is interesting when you're visiting lands that are not yours. It's a very special relationship you have to have. When I rolled into Standing Rock, I rolled in with over 45 members of my motorcycle club on motorcycles. And the minute we got there, everyone thought we were running to the front lines. And you know, what I explained to the activists I was with was that, and the other members, and also to the people, that we're there to serve the people. And the first thing you do when you get to these frontline camps, when you're not of those people, is to make sure everything is being taken care of behind the scenes. How is food? How are people eating? How is the trash being removed? Is there security in-house? And so always reminding the people that we're with that we're guests here. We're guests here on these lands. And so whatever frontline work that I've done in my 30 years of doing this, I always go with that approach to before we get to those, you know, those frontline actions, to supporting everything that has gone on before we arrived, you know, because it's very easy, you know, for us to roll up, you know, in our manhood and be, all right, we're here, man, you know, let's get up there, but, you know, there were people here before doing that work, and then also reminding we are guests here. When we leave, these people have to live here. And so you have to support in that way. And that's always been sort of the way that I've approached being an activist. I've also been to the Amazon, and there as well. A few others might come to me in my work and journeys. Yeah, I mean, I can say that there is a rewarding feeling about supporting people in their, whether you're standing up for the earth or the water or sacred sites, communities in need. There is a feeling that you have of like, for me, it's like a feeling of self-worth, of a feeling that I'm doing something more on this planet. You know, although at the end of the day, I could really think about it and go, wow, it was such a small thing, you know, but sometimes those small things really can grow into larger things. And places that I remember working with some young kids in a school and sharing all of this, and they ended up raising like a whole bunch of money within their school for Mauna Kea, and then created this whole project. And from that, a young girl made a documentary out of it, and she was one of the students. And so, you know, sometimes just, you know, sitting and talking to people, just, you know, you plant that seed and it just becomes, grows. So although I think a lot of the work that I've done, I don't think that it's been this tremendous experience, you know, within the movements, but at the end of the day, maybe they fostered a little growth somewhere and assisted and helped in the larger scope of things.
And did you feel any connection in terms of the films that we were showing?
Yeah, oh, absolutely. I mean, I get, you know, I mean, I wish, you know, it was such a different time, you know, like I wish I was out there, you know, back in the early 70s and 80s, you know, before all the social media and before it was just, you know, I watched those videos, and you know, even as far back as Oka, which is, you know, it was the early 90s, right? Mm-hmm. It was just before all this, like, I mean, social media has helped and it's changed, but there's just a rawness, like watching the films just brought about this raw sort of like, you know, I guess it's maybe like a soldier today watching a World War II movie or a documentary, you know, just seeing how everything was just, it was just, you had to be there from your heart. You know, there were no selfies, there were no, you know, it was just, you were there in the work and that was it.
Yeah, it's probably for most people, it's hard to recall it, that time period, but that was pre-cell phone, things didn't get on TV, and there were only like 4 channels then, so you only saw what mainstream media wanted you to see. So the kind of work that early newsreel and early Third World Newsreel did, you could only see the films if someone went and rented and projected it or brought it to wherever you were. And sometimes they would have to even bring the projector with them in order to show it. So it was a much harder reach. And now everyone has a phone, everyone, which has been good, right? So this is how we find out about Standing Rock and places like that. But yeah, there's a huge differential, but what we are hoping to do is that by having these films, and as you see, filmmakers are still making films that you are now getting to see on PBS as well. So with that, we'd like to open up to any questions you might have for the filmmakers or the activists. Here.
I'd like to ask Ms. Fox, is there, so you've done this film, you have made apparent a connection between the first wave feminist movement and Native American tribal traditions, which is good. Is there a PhD or a bunch of PhDs to be done on this? Is this an area that can be researched a whole lot more to be developed further? Or does your film is it sort of lost to oral history or tradition, and your film kind of showed what can be shown? I'm curious.
Yeah, that's a good question. Sally Roche Wagner, who is in the film, has done a lot of research on this. And the book that she wrote that comes out in the film talks about this. She also has a book for young readers on this topic. So right now she's kind of the one that's writing about this. But I'm sure there's more research to be done. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
So I have a question about Mohawk Nation. I really like the music part in that film, and I can see how it connects different parts. And so I was wondering, who is the composer and where did you find the music? Yeah.
Well, the opening music is actually by Dmitry Shostakovich, who's not exactly an indigenous person, except in Russia. But all the other music is from indigenous peoples, which I was researching at that time. And I wish that maybe on the credits of the film, the music is identified. But there's a couple of people who were very popular at that time as indigenous musicians.
Any other questions?
Yeah, so I guess I wanted to start out with some comment and then questions. It says, thank you so much for the work. I think it's very much needed. I'm an immigrant. I've been here in the United States for 30 years, and I wrote very little about indigenous people until recently. This past summer, I got a chance to visit the Navajo Nation, kind of one of the tourist spots, and got to talk to this tour guy. He was from actually a Navajo, and just kind of hearing his story just kind of really changed my whole perspective of what does it mean to be in this country right now, so really I think this work is needed just to get a lot of people understanding what's the past, what's the future is going to look like. And I guess it's for doing this type of work that activists, you say a vision just to maybe bring it to the newer generations that's growing up, understanding, the history. Do you have any resistance in bringing that to kind of the mainstream education kind of curriculum? What are your thoughts, and how can we help?
I do. So I speak at a lot of schools, in particular, this is Native American Heritage Month, so I'm in a lot of schools, and I've been quite pleasantly surprised how many, particularly during the pandemic, because I think that during the pandemic, the country sort of took a little bit of a turn. I mean, you know, Washington Redskins were, you know, the name was removed. There was a lot going on with the, you know, the travesty of George Floyd, and I started to notice that more and more schools were asking about activism and asking about issues from Standing Rock to Mauna Kea. I think, you know, they really were in the news a lot, and so now I find more and more that a lot of schools are looking towards educating their students as to current issues that are affecting Indigenous people today, which is quite interesting because years back when I first started this, they never wanted to talk about anything, even current. You know, I mean, they didn't even teach that there were 5 nations of the Iroquois. I mean, 6 nations of the Iroquois. They only taught 5. You know, in the public schools. So I think it's great. I think it's moving in the right direction. Don't forget, Standing Rock was created by young people, by a bunch of young kids on the reservation who heard about this pipeline, and they were the ones who got the petition started. They were the ones who ran to Washington. So the young people are our future in frontline activism, and so this social media tools that we have, like Auntie Pua says, sacred Facebook. She calls it sacred Facebook because it really was instrumental in those movements. Like, that's how everyone found out. I mean, Facebook and Instagram no longer function the same after Standing Rock and after Mauna Kea. They made it much more difficult to share, much more difficult for people, because they realized how people were using social media to mobilize. And it was never the same. After Standing Rock, the way Facebook and Instagram functioned internally, it was completely different. And it's never been the same. It's never been as easy to share things that are going on. People were finding out what was going on in Standing Rock and Mauna Kea back in 2016. People were finding out all over the globe. And now it's quite difficult if something's happening somewhere in other countries for it to make it onto your page as easily as it did back then.
Well, plus they're stopping anything that reeks of what they think is political right now. Absolutely. So they're pulling people's posts down.
I want to comment on that too. So I was in education for 20 years, teaching in a high school here close to where I live in Akwesasne. And I found that there wasn't a lot of material on Indigenous people. So a lot of the times, like, I was lucky living here close to Akwesasne that I could bring people in from our community into my own classes. But I think if you look across the country, across the state, there's not a lot of content when it comes to Indigenous people. Like, they're learning about history on this land, but they teach so little about it. So, and you look in popular media, we're pretty invisible until lately. So, there's been some things that have come out, like reservation dogs is huge right now. All the kids are talking about that. So that's something that's come on in mainstream media, and I think it's really opened the door to other filmmakers. But I think that's, for myself, that's one of the reasons why I make films, is to kind of shine a light on what's going on today and through our own eyes. So that's, when I'm making a film, I want it to be something that maybe later generations, they can look back and see what it was really like for our people. So it's so important, I think, for filmmakers and storytellers to be out there telling our own stories and to be documenting, what's going on today. Not just for our people, but for the world to know.
You're absolutely right there.
Hi, my name is Savannah Romero. I'm a enrolled member of the Eastern Shoshone tribe from Wind River in Wyoming. And I have a question, but I also wanted to respond to your question because I think I've worked in this field for a while, but one of the biggest barriers that Native people face is invisibility that has become institutionalized, right? It is erasure that has happened on purpose. The reason why there isn't much material for teachers to teach, right, is not that's not a coincidence. It's happened on purpose. And so when we look at the latest research, what it tells us is that 27 states across the country make no mention of a single Native person in their K through 12 curriculum, right? And then 87% of the states that do mention a Native person don't mention a Native person after the 1900s, which means that when Native people are coming up in the rare instances that Native people are being talked about in our foundational learning in this country, it is through as existing in the past and not in a contemporary sense, right? And so, yes, we are in a moment right now where the visibility of Native people is rising, and there's a lot of power and energy around representation. That a lot of that was spurred by Standing Rock in 2016 that really exploded Native people into the consciousness of not only Americans, but of people around the world. And so I think one of the biggest challenges that we are up against is corporate media and the censoring in not only in our mainstream media, but within the film industry and within social media, right? There are people in positions of power who pull the purse strings, and those people don't want their money threatened, right? So they're going to say yes to the stories that don't threaten them. And so I think one of our biggest challenges is how do we tell those real stories, right, that challenge power, that challenge wealth in a way that and still have support, right, to fund those projects. My question is, I think, looking forward for the filmmakers that are on the panel, what are the, I think specifically for Ms. Fox, you know, I think there's so much work and so many artists have been, and so many Native activists for so long have been fighting for the message, we're still here, right? Just to like show people that Native people are still here and they still exist. But beyond that, right, kind of what, if that's already been established, right? If we are in a world where everybody in the United States knows that Native people are still here, what do you envision beyond that? What kind of stories are you excited to tell?
I think like for myself, the film work that I do, I focus on like Indigenous women, because I think their voice has really been put on the back burner for a long time because of the colonial world that we currently live in. And like growing up in Akwesasne, I was surrounded by a lot of really strong women. And so that's what I'm used to. And so that's what I focus on when I'm making films. I think what I'm looking for storytelling in the future, I mean, my current films that I'm working on right now, I'm doing a film on Indigenous women seed savers that are protecting and rematriating our heirloom seeds that, we've really become disconnected from our food, as a people all over the world. I think a lot of people are disconnected from their food. And, for the ones that are caring for those seeds, and for a lot of Indigenous people, those are our relatives, those seeds. And it's so important that we're caring for those seeds and making sure that we have all of that diversity and all those beautiful seeds that our ancestors saved for us, that we're passing that on for future generations. So the film that I'm working on is focusing on that, and I'm following 3 women. Angie Ferguson from Onondaga, who has been protecting a large seed collection in Onondaga, and really actively trying to rematriate those back to the people that they belong to. And I'm also following Becky Webster. She's from Oneida, Wisconsin, and she was a tribal lawyer and left that work to follow the food sovereignty movement, and is really a mover and shaker, doing really great things in her community. And so, I'm telling these stories about these women, but seeds are actually just like us. They've gone through a lot of the same things that we've gone through, being, you know, almost going underground, being hidden. Like a lot of the varieties you're just starting to see come back out now. And, you know, going through things like being relocation, like the Oneida people, a lot of them got moved to Wisconsin. So they're, you know, they're supposed to be right next to us, the Mohawks, but now a lot of them are in Wisconsin. You know, so anyway, sharing, and then as a storyteller, I always feel a responsibility to share history, you know, while I'm telling this contemporary story, so people know about things like the Sullivan campaign, you know, like food warfare, trying to, you know, get rid of our people through getting rid of our food. That was the actual tactic by George Washington and General Sullivan. So that's something that I'm going to touch upon in the movie, but I always feel like I have to have that responsibility of sharing these little pieces of knowledge that people don't know about, you know, so those are the kind of things that I'm working on right now. I'm also doing another short film for a project called Reciprocity. So it's Indigenous filmmakers from all over the world. We're in the second cohort, and I'm doing a film on a woman from my community. Her name's Jessica Shenandoah, and she's been really actively bringing back a lot of our land-based knowledge. So really looking for the things that we haven't done for a while and finding people that know how to do them, and then passing on that knowledge in the community. So I really, you know, I'm really attracted to those kind of people, those women that are, you know, you can tell that they're living what they're here to do. Like you can just see that in how they carry themselves. So those are the kind of things I'm working on right now.
That sounds great. It also sounds like it could be dangerous, because the one thing those corporations are trying to do, right, is to take the seeds and put a patent on it so that no one
knows.
knows.
Like that collection that she has, the big seed companies are offering millions of dollars for those, trying to get a hold of those seeds, so they're being protected right now. And people don't think about that, but it's so important. So those are some of the things I want to touch upon.
Great. Annie, do you have anything you want to say on this?
No.
Okay. Okay.
Any last questions? I saw someone's.
This is another question for Ms. Fox. My name is Ishkwaje. I'm a Anishinaabe from the Great Lakes. Also a filmmaker. I was curious as to what, if you like, you know, we come from very communal backgrounds. And so I was wondering if you incorporate, I mean, obviously you're telling stories from your community, but I'm wondering if you incorporate any of these communal aspects into the creation of the film, of bringing in different voices, whether it's just for feedback or for like the editing process, and if you could just discuss that.
Yes. Well, I work with my co-producer, is a German lady. So she actually came into the community and made a film about my brother who is an iron worker. It's called Skywalkers or Sky Dancers, one of those. And that's actually where I met her. And I was doing like film work in my community for like 20 years, like just doing small films and working with students doing films. You know, I taught a film class at our high school. And she was actually the one that helped me get started, you know, to make my first documentary. She helped me with writing the grant, and then I've been connected with her ever since. And for me, I think it's important to have that, because it, you know, you get fresh eyes on something. You know, like when in our communities, we know this, like we live this. And sometimes when I'm making something, I forget that people don't understand, you know, the communities that we come from. And sometimes when she's looking at something, she'll say, I don't know if people are going to get that. You're going to have to, you know, talk more about that. Or, you know, she'll let me know things that I might not pick up on because I'm too close to the material. And she's also really good at, she has a lot of filmmaker friends that she's introduced me to. And it's always good to get different perspectives on what you're doing. So like right now, I'm working on these two films, and I've been editing the one on the seed film because I'm still looking for post-production money. So I've been sitting there editing through all this footage, and you know, you get so close to it. So it's always good to have somebody to work with. And you know, here in my community of Akwesasne, there's not a lot of filmmakers. So I try to take advantage of, things going on, in other communities or even on Zoom or, to try to network with other filmmakers and, to get some different perspectives. And yeah, I think it's important.
Speaking of which, has it become less difficult for you to find funding for your films?
No, it's always difficult. I mean, I've been lucky. I've gotten funding from Vision Maker Media for my first 2 films, and they gave me production money for this film, but I haven't got post-production money yet, so I'm still working on that. And it's very competitive. Like you apply to the big ones like ITBS and those other ones, and they're so hard to get your foot in the door. Some people apply like 10 times. I've heard one guy 15 times before he got funded. So yeah, that's a lot of work. That I'm trying to concentrate on making a film, but you also have to wear the producer's hat and be out raising funds and doing all of that stuff too.
One more.
All right, so I'm gonna apologize because you're a filmmaker and you're a filmmaker. Filmmakers hate hearing ideas about another film, right? But you mentioned Akwesasne Notes and as an underground newspaper, but that really is an understatement because I subscribed to it throughout the 70s. And it was like a birthday present of Native American culture, every issue. It was 40 pages or something. It was fat. And it wasn't just about the Mohawk Nation. It was about Native struggles around the entire world. And those people, I don't know if they were men or women, they probably were both who were doing it, are getting older. And sort of pick up your comment, it was the anti-erasure media. And to pick up your comment, if someone were to make a film about it, you don't want a history. What I would want to do is have high school students read it now and say, what stands out to them? And then do a film that ties together those struggles as they were presented at that time with what young people are interested in now, which I don't think would be hard to do because that publication was way ahead of its time. And I haven't read it in 30, 40 years, but I bet if I did, it would sound pretty current. There's my 2 cents. Sorry about that.
Yeah, Akwesasne Notes is not in publication anymore. No, I know. But it was a great newspaper, and wherever I go, if I say I'm from Akwesasne, the older generation anyway will say Akwesasne Notes. Like, I remember that newspaper. So, yeah. And I actually used to work at the Indian Times, which was in the same building as Akwesasne Notes when Doug George was editor of that paper. So I was around. It was both men and women that worked there, and a lot of people from the community. Like I remember the Akwesasne Notes myself.
Yeah, I want to follow on your comment, and I think social media today is like a double-edged sword, okay? On the one hand, social media spreads a lot of information and creates knowledge of different things that are happening, as Clifton was talking about. But social media is corporate media, okay? Social media is controlled by like huge corporations, I mean, mega corporations, okay? And we can see like just what's happening now with Twitter, which was like a major source of like alternative information because there are a lot of good journalists who are reporting and sharing real knowledge with people. But when we lose those sources of information, then we go back into the dark ages, okay? We go back into a time where we have to create alternative forms of social media in the same way that people created Akwesasne Notes, okay? I was at the program, I'll be brief, okay? I was at the program the other night, and I don't know if you know him, Jamal Joseph, who was like in the Black Panthers, was talking about how the Panthers were able to like create knowledge of their existence through their newspaper, okay? Which was like working in the same way in their communities as Akwesasne Notes spread around their communities, okay? So we need to find ways to like be able to transform social media to create actual resistance and to create new forms of movement.
Okay. And so this is the moment that I'm going to ask for any last comments from our speakers or the audience. Certainly what we're hoping from an event like tonight is that you'll take back some of what you've heard and seen and encourage other people to pay attention and want to find out more. And as Katsitsionni says, her film is available now. It's streaming now on PBS. So if you should encourage people to see it.
Yeah, you should be able to find it this month because it's Native Heritage Month, so they usually play it. I also have a short piece that I directed on Sesame Street Workshop that's called Talking About Race. You can look that up and find it. So they have the 5 different races, and I directed the one on the Indigenous people, and I actually filmed it here in Akwesasne. So that's good for any of you that are looking for material for younger kids. And I want to just say nyawa for inviting me here, and that means thank you, and nyawa to all the people that came out to watch the films and to the other filmmakers.
Any final statements from everybody?
Oh yeah. It is Native American Heritage Month. Am I on? Actually, I just came from the talking about recognizing, and how everybody's sort of jumping on this sort of bandwagon of how they're recognizing Indigenous people. So the New York City Marathon, I just came from there. They just had a live land acknowledgement by the chief of the Ramapo Nation, Chief Perry. So it's it is interesting the way things are moving, but I think that I have mixed feelings about the way they're moving. Because I just don't. It's just hard to tell how heartfelt these actions that these companies and corporations now that are starting to acknowledge Indigenous people. But this whole thing with the marathon was kind of it was just it was. I just don't know that it was just a heartfelt attempt to really connect with Indigenous populations, and whether it was just an emotion, sort of something like they kind of had to jump on. So I think that although it's Native Heritage Month, and if you're a Native artist or a presenter, it's a busy time for you. And you could be thankful for the work, but you also have to be really observant as to what's going on, because everything's not quite what it seems,
I'd say nothing is quite what it seems.
Yeah, that's true too. Nothing is quite what it seems. But this thing, where everybody's just like, oh, well, we got to have a land acknowledgement. Oh, we have to have, and I give all these speeches about these land acknowledgements. It's like everybody and their mother has a land acknowledgement, and I'm like, okay, and what? Are you want to land? Right. What are you doing? Okay, and what? You want to acknowledge? There's a really funny. Go on YouTube. I mean, I think it's Facebook. Well, anyway, just put land acknowledgement skit, search it, and there's this hysterical land acknowledgement where the girl is like, should we leave? There's a theater doing a land acknowledgement, and she's like, should we go? We're on someone else's land. Lady's like, no, we're just acknowledging there were people here, and she's like, well, are you doing anything? Are you are you giving a donation? No, but anyway, check it out. I don't want to spoil it for you, but yeah, go, just Google land acknowledgement skit, and it'll come up. But that's sort of, what's happening. It's Native Month, but I don't know, I got my eyes wide open on this one. So.
Any final thoughts? Allan, anything?
No, really. With that, I'll leave it at that.
Allan, we met I think we met years ago too, but we met Indigenous Peoples Day again. And, right? Was that it? Yeah. Was it right? Indigenous Peoples Day, right? Was it?
No.
Where?
I can't remember.
Indigenous Peoples Day. Wasn't it on Randall's Island?
No.
Oh, was it?
It wasn't.
Oh.
There's another old
Oh,
white
it was
guy.
another. It was another event we met at. Yeah, it's a whirlwind. It's been a whirlwind month.
Great. Any last thoughts, Annie?
That's right.
Okay.
there you go.
All
Thank
right.
you for having me tonight, and I believe that all together we can make a positive change.
Well, that's why we're all here.
Yeah.
So we certainly hope so. But I want to thank everyone, Annie, Katsitsionni, Allan, and Clifton, and all of you for coming out tonight. And I hope you got something out of it. So, anyway.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Everyone in TV land, thank you.
And thanks, People's Forum.